New York, Hong Kong, San Francisco and even Paris. All these amazing cities have been recreated and explored in gaming. There's always something wonderful about seeing New York within the 40s or swinging through the skies in present day, but there seems to be a certain sense of excitement every time London gets its time to shine in gaming. But as someone who comes from London, there seems to be something wrong. Something about it doesn't seem real and it doesn't really feel like the London that I know. And that's what made me realise that there really is no place like London in gaming.
That's nasty. Come on. Just give me a second there, mate. I'll be right with you.
There is history built literally within the city walls. In modern gaming, we're constantly reminded that London was a dark, cruel place filled with nightmarish stories. And I just want to take a second to look at the times that the city had been created in gaming and the themes that have constantly been reused and how London should be entirely a different tone overall. 19th century London is probably one of the most iconic settings you can imagine. From the way it inspires so many works of arts and genres that we see to this day, from steampunks to smoky filled streets and of course terrible crimes like Jack the Ripper, it's a fantastic setting that felt perfect in any historic game and really allows developers and writers to be a little bit more creative with the unknown mysteries that lurk in the dark. Assassin's Creed Syndicate was a fantastic example and really captured the feel of Victorian London down to the T, and crumpets. Being able to run across London during the industrial period constantly left you in a state of wonder. And Victorian architecture just accommodating the gameplay styles of Assassin's Creed, making it look perfect for your character to be able to jump and even climb across. Accommodated with possibly one of the best soundtracks seen in the Assassin's Creed franchise by Austin Wintory, leaving you often feeling like you just want to jump into combat and then waltz your enemies to death. I know many people didn't enjoy the idea of the grappling hook because it took away the parkour system which Assassin's Creed is well connected to, but for me I really felt like it fit right in with the steampunk aesthetic and of course the industrial era, and coming up with new and silly ideas that the steampunk genre is all known for with its cogworks, and it just fits right in and really feels like it captures that aesthetic correctly. Something else I quite appreciate about Assassin's Creed Syndicate is that they did a great job with its story. It wasn't anything special, but for something set in Victorian London, it made sense for them to just fall back on Jack the Ripper as its main storyline, but they really chose not to do that and decided to take a more of a look at the gang life during this period. Though they did take a look at Jack the Ripper, as it is probably one of the most iconic things to happen during this period, it was just a bit of fun and it was just a light jab and even their own idea of what Jack the Ripper's story could be like. It often feels like Jack the Ripper is just an easy target to tackle. Because of its mystery behind it and a lot of its open ends, it leaves developers and even creative writers to be able to come up with their own stories, and it always makes it a little bit more interesting, but at the most time comes across a little bit more disingenuous to what really happened. There's also a sense of a paranormal presence that's created whenever you talk about the Ripper, and it is easily probably one of the most iconic and important mysteries to ever happen in the streets of London. And because they were never caught and no one ever knew who they were or what their motivations were or what the reason behind it was, they will always go down in history as a true villain of the Victorian period. And it always becomes indicative whenever you think of steampunk London or whenever you think of the industrial era or 19th century London. Because he was never caught, he constantly feels like a presence that still to this day haunts over the image of London itself. And because of that presence, it often feels like it's a paranormal thing or even something a little bit more ridiculous. And that brings me on to my next subject. With the constant reminder of death and stories that constantly surround the cramped streets of London, it's no wonder that the city is constantly used as a festering environment for nightmarish creatures. Gothic subculture all started in the UK and even in London, heavily inspired by the fashion of the 19th century and of course Bram Stoker's Dracula, which takes place in Whitby, which might as well be goth capital of the UK. And it also plays a very important part to my upbringing and is literally like a second home to me. So I love you, Whitby. I love all the family who's out there. You know who you are. Okay. So having Dracula's origin be so close to home for me meant that Gothic fantasy London is always literally a winner for me in my books. With nightmare creatures on the PlayStation 1 using the dark limitations of the system to capture a haunting tone that constantly surrounds the dark streets of Victorian London, to Don't Nod's Vampire capturing the essence of a plague-ridden and war-stricken earlier century London. There's been a serious case of the Spanish flu within this game, and it mirrors the effects of the Black Death in the 17th century. But there's actually something way worse going on and very different to what we're used to. Something that involves a little bit more vampires and ghouls that haunt the night and misty alleyways. And going back to Jack the Ripper, sometimes you get a touch of steampunk Victorian Jack the Ripper and then with a little touch of gothic horror, and then you might just find yourself playing games like The Order 1886. London has never looked so beautiful, and the linear gameplay really allows the world to be a little bit more detailed and precise with its environments, coming alive from the cleanest halls to the most rotten streets you could imagine. But using the gothic and Victorian setting to stage a Lycan and vampire story, once again catching that pure gothic aesthetic and Jack the Ripper mystery. So many games of course are inspired by Victorian London, but the imagery itself is more inspired by London rather than being set in London, so I'm not going to put them on the list, but there are of course a few honourable mentions. Of course I'm talking about the likes of Bloodborne or Devil May Cry 5, and even Destroy Human 2, and of course We Happy Few, which take inspiration from London during the 60s, and even then you could just talk about the European aesthetic of Pokemon Sword and Shield, or even Forza Horizon 4. But when games aren't too busy trying to hone in on gothic aesthetics or even the mystery of Jack the Ripper or vampires and zombies and ghouls or disease that may lurk within the streets of London, there is a modern take on London which is crafted by modern cinema, and it is linked very much to one guy, and that guy I'm talking about is Guy Ritchie. Snatch, Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, Rock and Roller, and of course the Sherlock Holmes films. Director Guy Ritchie has single-handedly created a sense of humour and a personality that many people link to Londoners. But most often Londoners actually connect to as well, often being able to relate to these personalities which feel too real to us because we know these types of people that really exist within our lives. But because of this stereotype that's been created within this modern cinema, it's also created a different look on how modern London should be depicted within gaming. From games like 2002's Getaway sharing the same attitude and stories of the London gangster films of Guy Ritchie, featuring characters that are stuck in many dirty pockets and of course old school East End London mobsters, which once again have that little sprinkle of that Guy Ritchie comedy.
I thought I told you to stay put.
Think I'm doing moron. I'm looking for my kid.
What did he call me?
A Mormon.
The fuck's that?
You know a Mormon. Them Bible bashers come round knocking on your door, telling you Jesus is a fucking yank.
Or even taking a look at the short scenes that you're in London in Uncharted 3, they directly take a look at the inspiration of Guy Ritchie's movies, taking place in a pub doing a shady deal filled with Jason Statham clones and all bald-headed fellas having pints on the table, waiting for a first punch to be thrown. But this scene at the same time perfectly depicts what people expect to see from something set in London, from a posh man in a suit doing a shady deal to the untouchable wit that the British are all known for.
Quick, hit him! Not bad idea, Grandad.
Trying to replicate the bare-knuckle fighting scenes that Sherlock seems to put himself into in the first movie, Syndicate went on this full aesthetic and wanted to make a whole entire side game out of this, which was a ton of fun, but at the same time you can really still feel that inspiration. And if modern London in gaming isn't too busy tackling the gangland warfare which may take place within the city, it's also tackling the way that our police handle certain situations. Whether you're talking about the Getaway 2 Black Monday, which sees you playing as a police officer who has to go and arrest people in dodgy council estates, or even the way that Call of Duty Modern Warfare decides to tackle its special SWAT units and even our SAS teams which have to go and investigate terrorist activity and even hunt down people within small states as well. There's something quite close and claustrophobic whenever it comes to engaging within UK and even British culture. The way that we like to handle our fights in our movies and even the way we like to handle our shootouts in our films seems pretty personal and it seems pretty close quarters. And games really like to do a good job of replicating that, as I said, with Call of Duty being set in small homes, or even Getaway being set in small council estates, or even the way Assassin's Creed likes to make sure you get up in characters' faces with hand-to-hand combat. It seems to have an aesthetic, but of course it does sell the look and it really does fit within the environment. All the examples I gave above are all great in their own way, and I'm not slagging off any of them to say that they're bad or there's something wrong with them, because they really do create an aesthetic and they really do make London shine in all its great ways. But there seems to be something about London that hasn't been captured correctly. But there is a game out there that has demonstrated what London could look like in gaming and really has captured its aesthetic and look perfectly, blending the Victorian Gothic architecture with the back streets of modern London and city life filled with claustrophobic alleyways, and it generally felt exciting to walk around, and it felt like you was walking around a dodgy estate of London, which is a familiar feeling. And the game I'm of course talking about is Ubisoft's Zombie. Brick Market Lane is perfectly captured within Zombie because of its use of small claustrophobic back alleys. London is a place which doesn't really allow you to have room to breathe. Unlike wide open areas which are available in America where settings can be expanded on and even explored, London seems to be pretty claustrophobic and almost maze-like. And Zombie really captured that very well. Being able to walk around small cramped houses and the council estates, it just felt like right at home. It felt really iconic and even familiar to me, just being able to walk around and see these graffiti filled walls and even litter scattered across the floor. It's something that relates to me, and it's a side of London that you don't often see within gaming. But something that really brought it all together was the use of diversity. It does something that London is known for, is its use of characters and different people who may live within it. From race to gender to sexuality, no matter what happens, there's these types of people live within London, and it's something that really brings the city alive. And Zombie idolises that and actually uses it to its advantage, by having your character switch out every time you die with a completely different person, and also having zombies matching certain areas where you are within the game. With police officer zombies showing the correct uniform no matter if they're man or woman, and also showing uniform used for different times, where you can see that they've been wearing a high vis jacket from when it's been raining or even when they've been working at night, from even the likes of beefeater zombies that lurk within the halls of royal palaces and even royal located areas. But also something here that stands out to me as a type of zombie which is really peculiar is a tracksuit zombie. And if you know London, you know tracksuits are a pretty big deal. Designer tracksuit culture is synonymous with modern London and UK as a whole. I really do relate with chav culture more than I like to admit, but that's because I come from a small council estate in South London. So I was surrounded by this culture and affected by it no matter what or no matter where I went. From being bullied to getting into trouble by hanging out with the wrong crowd. And within recent years we've seen the rise of grime and even drill music hitting the mainstream within the last 2 decades, and the influence itself has only grown chav culture and even gang culture, and it has also expanded across the whole entire country. Chav culture is filled with a bunch of youths who are, putting it lightly, just a bunch of little shits. And because of the rise of culture itself, gang violence and even youth violence has risen because of it, and it is just a shame to see that, because it has really struck a real fear into people's hearts because of how aggressive and borderline psychopathic some of these youths can be. I do find it crazy how often ideas of cultists or even psychopaths and even terrorism as a main motive is trying to warn us about a villain or how dire certain situations can be within a story. But there seems to be this idea that we shouldn't ever tap into the true reality and fear that lies within London, and always tapping into the Guy Ritchie Victorian wonderland of kings and queens. And that's why I feel like we really haven't got a correct interpretation of London that many could relate to who live within the city itself, or even suffer from the same fears and anxieties that many can relate to. Did you know that because of chav culture actually getting bigger, there's even a British subculture within horror called hoodie horror, which is a genre made popular by the likes of the kidulthood and adulthood films, or even Eden Lake, and of course Harry Brown. These films all focus on the real and genuine fear that a lot of people have with these troubling youths, going around mugging and even senselessly killing no matter what happens, just to prove they are hard or even have a bit of a reputation to live up to. I would love to see a game that really captures the hoodie horror of London and that fear and anxiety that a lot of people really do suffer with. And it's difficult to really capture this from an outsider perspective if you've never lived within dodgy council estates or ever seen a whole gang of youths just sitting on a corner wall preparing to attack you. There's something quite ominous and scary about it because you never really know whether or not they're going to attack you because they want to prove something or if they believe you said something about their mum. Maybe having the game focus on the anxieties of the character themselves and even using the claustrophobic council estates and maze-like back alleys of London to really show what it's like to be surrounded or even be in a culture that you can't escape from, even though you feel like you have no part of it. Of course, I understand why games like to use that Guy Ritchie gangland movie aesthetic, or of course the comedic wit of the Brits, or even then the Victorian era mystery. It's because it really does capture a sense of wonder and brings the city alive and makes people feel a little bit more happy and excited of what goes on within the city of London and sells tickets for people to come see it. But for people like me who's lived within it, I know there's a darker side to it that I would like to see more explored within gaming. I'm tired of seeing vampires and werewolves or even Jack the Ripper pop up for the 100th time within gaming. Instead, I want to see more of a personal interaction for what it's like for people who are stuck within a subculture they have no right being within, being stalked by people who have no care in the world if they want to hurt you or not. And I personally feel like that Rockstar could probably capture this essence and even environment within the latest GTA game, or even then with a Manhunt style experience, not holding back with on its grit and gore and showing that people are just as cruel as animals and monsters that lurk within the dark streets of London. Steampunk, Victorian, Gothic, gangland, and of course hoodie culture. There are many stories and ways that London could be viewed, but until I really see the side of London that I knew and grew up with, it will prove to me that there really is still no place like London in gaming. Well, that got a little personal, didn't it? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please let me know down below what are your favourite games that are set in London, whether you're talking about Tomb Raider or even GTA London. I would like to know. And if you're not from London, what do you think of London from an outside perspective, from viewing it from a gameplay point of view or even viewing it from a story driven point of view? Is it all wonderful fairylands, or is it actually something a little bit more darker and sinister which you would not even want to visit? If you did enjoy this video, please leave a like down below, and of course I'll see you at the next checkpoint. Bye bye.